Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High-Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've been learning together during the Leadership Project podcast, together with many other lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed at first-time leaders, but really, there's lessons in there for everyone. It would be greatly appreciated if you could go and grab your copy on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Scott Ritzheimer. Scott is the CEO and founder of Scale Architects, and he's helped more than 20,000 businesses launch and then grow. And his specialty is helping entrepreneurs who have been successful up to a certain point, but then kind of start getting in their own way. And that can be true of any type of leader. So we're going to talk today a lot about the growth of teams, the different stages that teams go through, and the different leadership styles that one might need to be able to break plateaus. And that's a big thing for teams. It's a big thing for businesses if you're an entrepreneur or a founder out there, but it's also a big thing if you're in a team that seems to get a certain level of success and then plateaus, something what was working doesn't seem to be working anymore. And then you need to change something up to break that plateau. And guess what? Then it happens again. And it's this cycle that any team goes through. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. It's a really important one for all of you out there to think about, whether you are leading an entrepreneurial business yourself and you're a founder, or whether you're a leader inside a multinational organization. There is still going to be something in here, even if you're leading in nonprofit. And I note that Scott has done a lot of work in churches and in other types of nonprofits. Same thing can happen. Your leadership style will be suitable for one part of your journey, and then all of a sudden it won't be working for you. So, Scott, without any further ado, please do introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us some of that rich detail of your background and what led you to be with us today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Mick. Hello to what is most certainly an amazing audience. Just such an honor to be here. And mine is quite an abnormal journey. And in many ways, I think, especially in the entrepreneurial world, a very normal journey. But it started off, I never really looked to be a leader. It's something that I kind of happened into. And I think a lot of leaders find themselves in that point is we don't necessarily look for leadership. It's almost thrust upon us. And it leaves us kind of wondering, like, am I a leader? What kind of a leader am I? And these people that I'm leading, what kind of people are they? What's going on here? And that was very much my story. Now, this happened when I was 20 years old. 20 years old, I found myself relaunching a business that had been sold, repossessed, and just ugly. But I found myself relaunching this organization. We bring in a couple of employees right away, and it's kind of off to the races. I, at this point, knew nothing. I hadn't been to business school. I had really never worked a full-time job anywhere. Like, this is just real-time, real-world stuff. And in the beginning, it actually worked pretty well. We were so consumed with just trying to keep up that there wasn't really time for problems, right? There were problems everywhere, but there just wasn't really time for problems between people. But it wasn't for, about 6 months, maybe even a little bit longer, that I increasingly found myself dealing with people and not things. right? I found myself dealing with people problems, not, kind of functional problems. I did not like it. It was not, I didn't find myself naturally adept at leading people. I was a great problem solver, smart guy. Like I could figure stuff out, but like getting other people along in the process was just not, it didn't feel like my A seat. And when you're leading an organization, when you're leading a team, like that's just, it comes with the territory, and it took me a long time to really recognize that. And, where I'm kind of going with this is I wasn't, I was a natural leader in the sense that I kind of knew what I wanted and I knew that we would go after it. I was not a natural leader in the sense that I knew how to bring other people with me.
Right.
And what I found during that time was what was immensely helpful for me were personality profiling tools. And the very first one I ever bumped into was Myers-Briggs. And I just loved it because all of a sudden it took those kind of weird differences between people where we're saying two different things. Do we mean the same thing? Or we're saying the same thing. Do we mean different things? It took a lot of that kind of abstract, interpersonal, whatever, and just kind of put it on paper for us to say, hey, that person's normal and that person's normal. And they're completely different and that's normal. And so that really started a journey for me of getting kind of outside of myself to understand the people that I was leading. And ultimately, that led me to a tool that I now use with all of my clients. I sold that company, and now I'm a business coaching consultant. And in my work, with whether I'm doing one-on-one coaching or I'm working with an entire team or an entire company, we're always constantly looking at what we've identified are the 4 leadership styles that show up at work or in a nonprofit environment or any group of 2 or more. How do we show up in those environments? And you introduced it in the beginning, but there's several elements of that are really important. One is that there are different styles, and we can talk about what those different styles are. That's pretty common in the profiling space. That's you see that a lot. Myers-Briggs had that, maybe DISC or Colby or predictive index, or pick which one you used. But the other part about it that actually took me quite a while to figure out, but is again just a material part of what we do, is how those styles show up over time. Because there's a time component to it as well, where just like you introduced, at one point in the team life cycle, the organization life cycle, the group, that's just getting together, there are different players that really come to the forefront at those different stages. And by tying those two things together, we can recognize, okay, here are the natural styles. Here's the styles here's my style. Here's your style. Here's how we can communicate. And as we're bumping into challenges, as this team grows and works together, what is the natural progression from one style to the other so that we can kind of navigate that together? And the result of that is what we found is really the secret to any success as a team, any success as a group. And that is getting to a place where we can make high quality decisions together. Because fundamentally, that's what organizations are about, is can we make high quality decisions together? And can we execute those decisions? And what we found is that you need all 4 styles to be able to do that effectively. And so to kind of round out this story, I went, we restarted this organization. I learned that, hey, being a leader is a lot more than just telling people what to do. And I figure I got to understand these people I work with. We do that, grows phenomenally. It's wonderful. And was able to transition out of the company with that same set of tools that really got me to where I was. And that's kind of the third piece of using these different systems. And really, they're all great, right? I have one that I'm kind of, I enjoy a little more than the others, but they're all great. And what they allow us to do is, even after our time leading our organization, there's continuity to the next leader, where you can hand it off and say, hey, this is where all of these different players fit in, and here's how you can lead them best. And so that transition was wonderful. And I owe it so much to just the ability to look at people through this lens.
There's so many things emerging for me there, Scott, from everything you're saying, and I'd like to unpack a few of them one by one. So to start with, to hear your experience, and for those that are watching this on video, you'll see a very youthful Scott with decades of experience. And it doesn't sound like that should match, but he started when he was 20. He scaled his first $10 million business and then sold it by the age of 35 and learnt so many lessons through that what he now does is pivot and then show others what worked and what was the secret to that success to do that. So it's really interesting that you had that journey. You've been through the journey that you're talking about with all of these other people. And the first one I want to talk about is that dawning about leading people is different to leading your specialty. And whether you are a solopreneur out there who might have been a founder of a business who started it from scratch, and then you realize to scale you need to bring in people, and then you stop and realize and go, oh my God, these people are far more complex than what I was doing before. Or if you're in a multinational company and you're a wonderful software engineer or a great digital marketer or you're a brilliant accountant and you get that tap on the shoulder and all of a sudden you're a leader now, well, that's your first time that the game changes. And I'm sure that this will not be the first time, it won't be the last time that we say this on this interview today, Scott, that what got you to here won't get you to there. So that first pivot from having your domain skills, what you're good at, does not automatically mean that you're going to be good at leading and managing people. Tell me more about your own lessons learned when you made that transition.
So the one that comes to the surface at first, and it's just a great example. So I know you're kind of another world away from here, but here in the US, we've got a fast food restaurant called Chick-fil-A. And it's a great organization. People who love it, right? But I had an opportunity to see the CEO of that organization teaching and leading people, and contrast that with my own leadership at the exact same time. And the difference was just it was night and day. And in seeing myself failing as a leader and seeing him succeeding as a leader, and just being able to compare and contrast those was a massive thing. And so what I realized, number one thing that I realized, and there were a couple, but the biggest one was when he took that stage, he did everything he could. Now, he was from a stage, and in my environment, I was just in a meeting, right? But he was from this stage, had every reason to be the guy, right? Is the CEO of a $1 billion organization, talking with basically a bunch of 20-year-olds at the time, and had every reason to kind of be like, hey, check me out. But instead of that, what he does, he walks out, he takes his suit jacket off, he takes his shirt, he untucks it, and kind of just like drapes it out a little slovenly. And he's just like, and he sits down at the edge of the stage and does everything that he can to kind of reduce the distance between us. And to say, this is about you guys. It's not about me. And when I was leading, by virtue of me feeling like I had the answers, by virtue of me feeling insecure as a leader, I was making it about me. I was making it about how I could drive forward and how I could do it. And I remember that. I will never forget that. I mean, it was just one time, one talk. It wasn't even what he was talking about, but just the way that he presented himself as a leader was night and day. And it really, really drew it out for me that being a leader, it's not about having the best technical chops. It's not about having all the answers. It's not even about being the best people person, but it's about saying it's not about you. Right? It's about the people that you're leading. And by focusing my time and energy on helping them achieve their best, that's when it really started to change for me as a leader.
Yeah, wonderful, Scott. I love this story, and I've got this clear picture in my head. And I love metaphors for this reason, because I'm a very visual person. So I've got this clear picture in my head, but the things I'm picturing as he takes that stage, I'm thinking of three things. The first one is that he's meeting people where they are. So that very movement of moving to the edge of the stage is moving to meet them where they are instead of from where you're at. The second one is human connectedness. So he's looking to connect with everyone. And I'm picturing a huge room of people, but he's still, even in that huge room, looking for human connectedness because people want to feel like they matter. And the third one then is about what you said, the beautiful summary that said that it's not about him, it's all about his team. So leadership is not about you, it's all about the team that you lead. And Simon Sinek very often says leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. Can I ask how, when you saw that and you took that lesson from that session, how did you put it into action afterwards?
Yeah. So a couple of the big ones were I realized I needed some tools to be able to do that. And that's a wiring thing. Not everybody's going to be that way, but it's just I needed some rails to run on. And so by putting first thing first, it helped me to realize what I needed to pay attention to, right? Because I was out there looking for resources to have the right answers when what I needed to be looking at were resources on how to lead people. And so that was the biggest one. It started me on a journey of, I ended up doing a lot of reading. And one of the things, I didn't have language for it for quite a while, but what I realized I was doing with each of those things, whether it was a book I was reading or a personality profile I was reviewing, was I was trying to learn to speak the language of my audience. Right. If I were to go, here in the US, I speak English. If I were to go to Mexico and speak there, fortunately, a lot of people know English, but I would serve my audience much better if I went and spoke in their language. Right. Or at least had a translator to do it. And so that same principle applies in leadership. And particularly with the different profiling tools is I learned to see the world through their eyes and to be able to speak in their language. And what I've found most people do, especially when we're teaching it, is like they want to learn about themselves first, and that's natural. You see a leadership thing is, what kind of leader am I? But then the more powerful thing is, what kind of leader are my people, and how did they interpret the world? Because if I can speak to them in that language, my ability to get through, my ability for them to be seen or feel seen, my ability to accurately communicate what I need done or what we need done as a team goes through the roof, right? It's just night and day. Whereas if I come and say, hey, I'm in charge, you want to talk to me, you come on my terms, right? You need something, you do it my way. Sure, I may have the right to do that, but it's not very helpful.
Mm. What I'm hearing there, Scott, is a deep level of empathy at that point. So some second and third loop thinking where you're not just seeing the world through your own eyes, you're seeing the world through their eyes. What leader do they see? How do they see the situation? And once again, meeting them where they are, and that ability to get connectedness by still staying true to yourself, but understanding their needs and what they're seeing through their eyes. I really like that. Coming back to your introduction at the start, the other one that popped into my head when you spoke a lot about MBTI, and I hadn't considered this before, the world has moved a lot in recent times to understand the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity of thought and the understanding that different is not necessarily wrong. In fact, different can enrich the human experience and enrich the organization. And I'd not actually considered this before because MBTI has been around for a very long time, but that might have been our first foray into that, to go, you know what? It's completely fine that we have extroverts and introverts. It's completely fine that we have thinking people, we have feeling people. And to acknowledge that and celebrate it and go, well, a strong team is someone that covers all bases and has that diversity in it. Any reflections on that?
Yeah, the first one, and I don't know why this is coming up, but what's interesting is a lot of these different systems actually have their roots in military usage around World War I, World War II. So Myers-Briggs was one of those. And so it's kind of interesting how those were kind of born in this pressure cooker of how do we get people moving together? And, it's never worth it. But how redeeming is it that we can understand each other better post-war, as a result of that is just a fascinating thing. But yes, one of the things that they realized with Myers-Briggs and with others is, there's a difference between fighter pilots and bombers, right? There's a difference in what makes ground infantry work versus another. And we don't have to overdo war analogies, especially in the times that we're living in right now. But what's at the root of those is just how do you get people working together? How do you leverage the strengths of different individuals? And yeah, absolutely understanding that wiring, and then not going for everyone having the same wiring, but looking at how can we leverage a diversity of these different thoughts to come together and like I said earlier, make those high quality decisions as a team. Lean into the strengths of your other team members, and also spend as much time as possible playing to your own strengths.
That is a beautiful segue to the third thing I picked up during your introduction, where you spoke about the 4 leadership styles, and we're going to unpack those in a moment. But you started talking about the fact that you're going to need different leadership styles at different stages, but also that you need all 4 in different levels at different stages. And the word that popped into my head when you said that was co-creation. And now to take the military analogy that you used, if I can pivot that to imagine an orchestra, all right, an individual musician, everyone has their talent and it can sound good. Like if you listen to a violin player, yeah, a good violin player, it sounds really nice. You turn that violin player into a quartet, something interesting just happened. It just got richer. You turn that quartet into a mini orchestra around them, now it got richer again. And then you end up with a full orchestra and everyone is playing their role. Everyone's bringing their superpower or their strength to the table and playing their role. And all of a sudden we're co-creating something that didn't exist by the elements of the individual components. What's your thoughts on that analogy?
I think it's a great analogy. And what I would say to kind of extend that metaphor is that some instruments sound a lot better by themselves than others, right? Some instruments really find their best voice in the midst of other instruments around them. I'm thinking of like a drum kit, here in the US. Not too many people will go and listen to an album of someone playing drum. It's a great instrument, and there are phenomenal drummers and that's interesting, but it's not a full complement. Now take a piano, right? And you can listen to an entire album, you can listen to an entire lifetime's work of that. And so what happens is if we start judging each other, right, as instruments by the voice of the other one, it's like, well, as a drummer, like no one wants to listen to you, or drummers always play, I guess I can't overdo the metaphor here, second fiddle, right? But if we try and compare, like use those comparisons, it's not very helpful. The question is, when we're bringing people in, what is the contribution to the voice of the team? Right? What is, and that's where we don't just need a bunch of pianos. We need a piano. We need, maybe a guitar or a bass or drums. And so their roles in the team and kind of when they come in is it's just different. It's not any better. It's not any worse. It's not any greater. It's not any less. But we need each of those things. You try and get a whole group of people together playing at the same time without anyone providing time, right? And it's just really hard to do. And so, I think it's a great metaphor that you can really run with.
So let's bring that to the leader now. And you said you need someone there that's going to bring it together. So once again, let's take the analogy and let's pick the world's best players at every single instrument and get them together without any kind of sheet of music, without any kind of, call it a vision, without any kind of plan, and just go 1, 2, 3, go, everyone play. It's going to be pretty messy, right? So how do we then bring that together? Well, that's the role of the leader. It's about being able to go, okay, this is where your strengths are. I'm going to draw out those strengths and I'm going to bring this together, and this is how you're going to complement each other. We're going to co-create something together. Yeah, I think there's something in this, and I'm loving this conversation, Scott.
I'm trying desperately to remember, but Ben Zander either was or still is the conductor for the Boston Philharmonic. I probably just totally botched that, but just brilliant conductor. And he basically said, he's like, I'm the one in charge, but I'm the only one on that stage who doesn't have an instrument.
There you go.
And it's like, yeah, that's what leadership looks like. And it really, really does.
Love it. All right. So let's talk about the leadership style. So we got 4: visionary, operator, synergist, and processor. Tell us how you came up with that and how you think the 4 connect together. Let's break it down. Let's break it down one at a time. That's too much. Let's go with visionary. Let's start with visionary.
Let's do it one at a time. So I can't claim any credit for making it up. My business partner, Les McEwen, did. It's just a brilliant, brilliant guy. And he discovered it just by observing teams. So this is, again, there's lots of styling things out there that each have their different strengths. This was really birthed in team work, team dynamics. How do we get teams working together? And what he realized were that there are 3 natural styles. And so we're not going to go through all 3, but the visionary, operator, processor. So as we're talking about these are the ones that we tend to be born with one of these styles. So who are visionaries? Visionaries are starters, right? They are the idea people. You can tell a visionary, because they're like, they'll walk into a room and they may have never been anywhere near the problem or opportunity that you've talked about. They may not have ever even worked in the industry. But as soon as you say, hey, this is, what it is, they will have 5 ideas on how they can make it better, right? They're magnets for opportunity. They are constantly assessing the world for what could be and what should be. They tend to be very entrepreneurial, even if they work in large organizations. They tend to be starters. They tend to not only accept risk relatively well, but oftentimes seek it. They need risk to do their best work. I remember when I was a kid, I played soccer or football for the rest of the world. And I found this pattern about myself that I never actually could shake, but I always played best against the best opponents. And my worst games were always against, the lesser teams in our league. And that's what visionaries are often like. If you put them in a big challenge, they tend to rise to the occasion. Where they struggle is where they get bored. And so what ends up happening with visionaries is that they have a very high squirrel factor. I don't know if you've ever seen the Pixar movie Up, but there's this little dog named Doug, and he's got a collar so that lets us hear what he's thinking and saying. And so we can kind of understand Doug's world a little bit. And Doug, for the life, he wants to be part of what everybody's doing. He's happy. It's awesome. But as soon as he sees a squirrel, he's up a tree, right? He's just gone. And that's what our visionaries are like. They have shiny object syndrome. They can seem flighty in a team environment, but it's not because they're short-sighted. It's actually because they're constantly assessing the world around them for what could be better, right? Where are the opportunities? And because of that, it can really rub the other styles the wrong way, but it's a strength that they bring to the team. And what I love to encourage visionaries to do in a team environment is to focus on the question why. Right. You mentioned Simon Sinek before, start with why, but visionaries are starters. And in doing so, and in looking at the way that the world could be a better place, what they do best for a team is to say, hey, why is this so important? Right? Why do we need to change when it's very comfortable to stay the same? Why should we try something new when we don't know if it's going to work or not? Why is it that we have to have this commitment of behaving the way that we do, versus just doing whatever feels good? And visionaries do that exceptionally well.
Yeah, very good. And you're right. It can be the shiny object syndrome is something that can be an impact. How do you harness that then? So if they are going to come up with 10 ideas a day, let's say, how do you get the focus?
Yeah. For a strong visionary, it's about 1,000 a day. And the 10 that make it out are like, I have filtered to the nth degree. So it's a real thing. And what compounds that is not only that they have the ideas, but they tend to be more verbal in their processing. They tend to talk to think. And so oftentimes visionaries also find themselves in leadership roles. They're one of the styles that's most readily recognized as a leader, even though I would argue that all four are equal leaders. But they find themselves many times in a position of authority. And so the risk for visionaries is if they're talking to think from a position of leadership, that doesn't sound like talking to think. It sounds like a decree. Right? So visionary comes in the room, is like, hey guys, we should take all of our pink widgets and make them blue. They're coming in saying, wouldn't it be cool if, or what do you think would happen if? But because of the way that they communicate that, everyone else hears, okay, let's go. This is what we're doing. Right? And so everyone hears a decree, but more often than not, they're just trying to get it out there and see if it lands. And so you've got to be really careful on that. One of the things that I'll consistently encourage them to do is you've got to put blinders on. You've got to continue to get focused on that vision that you have for the group for the future, because you can see it clearer than anybody else. And use that power to see clearly to paint an ever clearer picture of a single horizon. The temptation is to look at all the different ways that we could go because you can see them all so clearly. But the service that you bring to the team, being more synergistic, which we'll come to in a moment, as a visionary, is to take that superpower and direct it. And the narrower you can direct that, the clearer you can be about where you're going as an organization, the more compelling you can be as a communicator of that vision. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, this is wonderful advice. I want to break that down a little bit. So the visionaries, they do see things that the rest of us don't, right? They see a clearer picture of a world that doesn't yet exist, the horizon that you speak of. So they've seen something that we haven't seen, and they're trying to bring everyone along the world to say, hey, look at this picture I've found. It's wonderful. The future looks great, kind of thing. The risk there, if they're a visionary that also thinks by talking, which many of them do, you're going to confuse people. So you need clarity of message. And if I can bring it back to what you said before about why, if they can ask them and remind themselves every day, why are we doing this? Then that horizon is clear and they can declutter a little bit and go, okay, the path to that horizon looks like this. And then communicate with clarity the vision, not communicate the 1,000 ideas that popped into their head, but communicate the clarity with vision that gets you to that future that they've seen that no one else has seen yet. That I think
it's a discipline, but it's powerful.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is, as clear as they can see the horizon, the path to it is typically quite murky, right? And as clear as that distant future is, the next step is either not interesting enough, right? Or just out of focus, right? And so what great visionaries will do is they'll recognize, I'm good at starting stuff. I'm good at seeing where we need to go, but I'm not necessarily the one who's going to get us there.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they create a space for that second leadership style that you mentioned, the operator, to really come in and show their strength. And so where visionaries are starters, operators are finishers. These are folks who just love to get stuff done. They will walk through walls to see the vision of that visionary come to pass. They are ruthless finishers. They are literal action-oriented doers. The operator in the room is always the one about 5 minutes into the meeting tapping furiously with their heel underneath the table or their toes, and then about 10 minutes in, they're typing away on their with their thumbs on their phone's keyboard, texting someone, get me out of here. They don't have time for meetings. They just want to be out doing the thing. They don't care about all the business BS. They just want to get stuff done. And that can be a challenge in a team environment, because what does it look like when a team comes together to work? Many times it's meetings. And one of the challenges of operators who pride themselves on what they can get done when they're stepping into their role as an operator leader is to start to focus on what can we get done. Mm. And that's a big shift for an operator leader. And it's oftentimes those A players on a team, the big solo contributor who are just knocking it out of the park. We think, hey, this person really knows what they're doing. Let's promote them to leadership. Mm. Many times that's an operator. And many times the last thing they want to do is slow down to bring everybody else with them. And so our operator leaders have to step into that role of being, again, more synergistic by looking at how can we as a team succeed? How can I use my strength to get the ball across the line, not just to constantly work myself, but to help move the whole team forward? And you do that by being there, by showing up, by being with the team. And that can be hard for operators to do, but man, is it powerful when they do. And the question that I love for operators, they don't even have to think about it, right? They just constantly and intuitively drive toward it is what? Like, what are we doing now? Mm. I understand that that's where we're going, but we're never going to get there if we don't take the next step. And so what our operators do is they bring us down to the ground level where the traction is made and they get us going. And it's a wonderful thing, but it takes a lot for an operator to do that. And especially for visionaries and the other styles, we have to appreciate it's not natural for them to sit in meetings. It's not natural for them to work at our pace. It's not natural for them to talk about something that they'd rather just be doing. And when we can appreciate how big a cost that is, then we can even more so leverage their strength in helping us stay grounded and move forward.
I'm hearing some amazing things again, Scott. So first of all, a vision without action is just a dream, right? So unless you have someone there that is going to drive it into action, you're not actually going to progress towards that vision. I'm hearing that then the natural tendency of these operators is a very task-oriented person that just wants to get out there and do stuff, but that can come at its expense because they just want to get on with it, and they might come from a school where it's very much like I did this, I want to do this, very hands-on. And what I heard from you is that transition, when they transition from I to become more we, that's when they actually start bringing the team along for greater impact. And it made me think of my favorite African proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And that's the shift that these operators need to make. But what I loved is the empathy that you showed to understand that these operators don't like sitting in meetings. They want to finish the meeting as soon as possible so they can get back to doing. And that empathy is important because if you don't understand that, you will lose them. They'll get frustrated and they'll get tired of not doing and had enough of all this talking. I just want to do something. How's my reflection there of what you're sharing?
It's spot on. And the reason that, belaboring the point a little bit is because what I see, especially in more established teams, is that where they start to lose, the first style that they start to lose is oftentimes the operator, especially at higher levels in an organization, because they're kind of cast as individual contributors. They're seen as not being strategic because they have a very short window of focus. What needs to get done next? And so when we start to measure them by the visionary's ability to see, right, and articulate, rather than the operator's ability to see the next step and take it, we can start to either cause them to self-select out. I don't want to be in all these meetings with these people all the time. Or we'll select them out and saying, hey, we need more strategic people at this level. But the risk there is if we get a bunch of people who are all strategy, right, who are all visions, just like you said, it becomes all dream. And that actually causes some really significant challenges in teams when they start to lose that operator flavor to the mix.
Yeah, okay. All right. I love this a lot, Scott. Let's move on to the next one. What's the difference between an operator then and a processor?
I love how you reframed that because it's a big challenge for many people they see operators and processors as being cut from the same cloth. They're both task oriented. To visionaries and even to synergists, they seem to be the detail oriented people, right? Because they're more task oriented, because they're more linear. But processors and operators are two entirely different creatures. And one of the main places that shows up is just in terms of system and process. So a processor will literally think in terms of system and process. They think in terms of algorithm, right? What is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4? If you ask a processor to get from A to Z, I can guarantee you they will touch B, C, D, E, F, G, right? The whole way through. Now, what happens if you ask an operator? They are going to look for how many letters they can possibly skip so they can get to Z as quickly as possible. And so you may call it cutting corners. You may call it being more effective, right? And depending on the environment, one of those is more effective than the other. But what happens with operators is that they are very much figure it out as they go, right? Tell me what to do and then don't watch, right? They're not necessarily known for their ability to stop and reflect. They're not really one to say, hey, give me a process, tell me how to do every step. That's the last thing that an operator wants. But what happens when you've got 7, 8, 9, 70, 700 people doing the same thing different ways, right? Making it up as we go every step of the way. It's chaos, right? Operators, a world of operators is like the Wild West, here in the United States. You get the cowboys and it's crazy and, they're riding solo and all of that's fine, especially in the earlier stages of a group or of an organization or of a new product or something like that, where we've just got to rapidly get in there, figure it out and see what works. But it's not very sustainable. It's certainly not very scalable. And so what we find, you get visionaries and operators working together and things start happening. Like those two, visionaries and operators, are like rocket fuel. Visionary says, hey, this is what we should do. Operator goes and does it, right? This is what we should do. Operator goes and does it. Those things tend to grow. They get up off the ground quickly. It's actually the kind of magic formula for starting new things is actually getting visionaries and operators to work together. But at some stage, they look around and realize, hey, we're screwing up an awful lot, right? We kind of had these glory days of, it was tough and maybe we messed up every once in a while, but we got the ball across the line. But the complexity has built up. We've had enough success. This thing has grown enough that we're dropping the ball a lot more often than we'd like. And it's usually the visionary that recognizes that first because they're looking further down the road. And because our operators at this time, they're just in full on firefighting mode. And so they'll tend to recognize, hey, we need to bring somebody in who can help stabilize this thing. Mm-hmm. And that's when they go out and they find a processor. But processors, they are not a symbiotic fit in the recipe, if you will. They just see the world so differently than visionaries and operators. Visionaries and operators tend to be relatively action oriented. They have a bias to action. Visionaries by starting things, operators to being the as quick as they can to finish it. But processors, they tend to be know first, right? Let me think about that, right? They tend to be risk averse. They tend to be very linear in the way that they think. They're very systematic. They work at their own pace. A visionary says, hey, we need this tomorrow. And an operator is going to do everything they possibly can to get it done, before tomorrow. They're going to get it done today. You tell a processor you need it tomorrow, but it's a 3-day process. Guess when you're going to get it? In 3 days. 3 days. Because that's the process. Visionaries and operators want to do the right thing, but processors want to do the thing right. And so where we tend to see teams really, really struggle with conflict is particularly between visionaries, the most forward-thinking, most risk-seeking, most fastest starting, and processors, the most risk averse, right? The slow moving, the detailed precision. And those two just operate on such polar opposite wavelengths that you tend to see quite a lot of conflict between those two worlds. But the truth is, and the magic is, doing the right thing right. And that's what a strong visionary operator processor team can do with great consistency.
This is absolutely wonderful, Scott. And I've got these clear pictures coming through. So the visionary setting that vision of a future world that they've seen that no one else has seen yet, that operator who just wants to get out there and do that. And now the processor, and I think about your business name, Scale Architects, unless you're able to codify what you do in a way that you can teach it to someone else, you can never scale. Otherwise, you're going to have all of those cowboys just going off and doing it their own way, which will very quickly become a mess. So I'm picturing this processor as someone that's really key when you talk about scale, that ability to write it down so that you could show the next person and the next person and the next person so that you can scale your impact. And I think that's something that, if I come back to the solopreneurs for a moment, I think that's something that most solopreneurs do not do. They don't spend time going, they start their businesses very hands-on. They're doing everything. They're janitor to CEO, if you like. They're doing everything. At some point, they need to pause, stop, reflect, and probably get some help to do it, to write that stuff down in a way that you can bring new team members on and show them what they need to do to support the vision so that you can scale up. What I also loved in your description is you're describing the natural conflict that is now occurring. So you're going to have the visionary that doesn't care about details. There's the horizon. This is where we need to get to. The operator who wants to get on the bike and start going down the road, and the processor who wants to go, oh, hang on a second, what if we go this way? And what about this detail? And what about that detail? And they all want to work at different paces, at different levels of detail. How do you reconcile that? So we know that we need all three, but we've got three people that want to work at a different pace and a different level of detail. How do you reconcile that?
And therein lies the rub, right? Because we've got our visionaries there at 30,000 feet. We've got our operators at ground level. We've got our processors at subterranean level. The chances of them seeing the same thing are virtually non-existent, but the chances of them describing the same thing the same way from those varied perspectives is definitely non-existent. And so what happens when we get visionaries, operators, and processors in the room, the very formula that we need to create lasting success, what we get instead is an unstable triad. We get three people that are like oil and water, cats and dogs, insert, troubled metaphor here. And it shows up everywhere. It shows up in how we show up for work and when. It shows up in what we do when we're there. It shows up in how we attend meetings or value meetings. It shows up in how we would do something as simple as move a printer, right? You ask an operator to move a printer, what are they going to do? They're just going to go move it. You ask a processor, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to go read the lease and make sure that they're allowed to move it. They're going to contact the leasing company and say, hey, we're planning on moving. Is it okay? They're going to do this just exquisite but excruciating amount of work. And will the printer be moved? No. On the CEO's desk the next morning, there will be a memo on how the printer removal committee will be approaching the printer from the northeast corner and bending it. It's just, again, this is exquisite but excruciating level of detail. Now the CEO's ticked, the visionaries ticked, because they're like, all I want is the printer moved. Why is this such a big problem? And so when we get these three in the room, again, it's exactly what we need, but they're just not going to see eye to eye. And intuitively, we recognize the need for all three of these. Right. And that's the tension. If we didn't, then we would have a bunch of like visionary teams or a bunch of operator teams or a bunch of processor teams or maybe even visionary operator teams. But we intuitively recognize that we don't have the whole puzzle. And so we start bringing these other people in, and that's when it goes from bad to worse. So what do we do? And what we found happens, and this especially if you listen to Les tell the story, it eluded us for quite a while. But what we realized was that teams that were really performing for any extended period of time had cracked the code and started to develop the fourth style. So we talked about four styles. We said three of them are natural styles. We tend to be born some combination of visionary, operator, processor, oftentimes at least two of those. But what we have to do if we're going to really accomplish the success that we want as a team is that we need to start becoming more synergistic in the way that we show up. We need to start building the synergist style, which is actually the relational glue that holds everything together. Now, everyone has different language for this, and you actually see this pattern show up all over the place, but it's having a higher EQ. It's about being more others focused. It may even be about being more inwardly sound. It's all of these different things that basically do one thing, and that's to get us thinking in terms of what we call the enterprise commitment. And it goes like this. It's when working in a team or group environment, I will put the interest of the enterprise ahead of my own. And that doesn't mean we go and work without a paycheck or hate what we do. What it means is that we recognize, hey, I'm a visionary, but not every problem needs a visionary solution. Sometimes we already have the solution and we just need to give the team enough time to execute. Sometimes we've tried to execute a few times, we've messed up, and we actually need to go backwards and look at what happened and figure out how we can take the best of what happened and hold on to it while we eliminate the worst. All three of those environments require different styles. And so we have to recognize, yes, there are strengths in my style, but at most, what is it, a third of the time, right? If there's three styles and they're co-equally important, then most of the time we're not going to be leveraging my best. But as a team, I still need to show up, because the moment that my best is needed, I need to be there. And so that synergist style is actually one that we tend to learn. We recognize the shortcomings of our style. We recognize the value of the other styles. And we start looking at doing things like speaking the language of our audience. We look at becoming a more synergistic visionary, or becoming a more synergistic operator, or a more synergistic processor. And when we do, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I like this. So synergist being the ability, whether it's one person or everyone embodying some level of this, the ability to empathize and recognize the skills of the others to bring it together for the magic. If we come back to the orchestra again, that orchestra does not co-create that magic without some kind of synergy that brings it all together. Yeah. Really good. Absolutely loving this, Scott. I've got an interesting question to ask you now. Something that's been popping into my head as we've been going along. When you think about the typical executive table of a big company, you'll have people that almost have some of this stuff in their job title. Whether they are naturally suited to these things or not, they'll have a job title. You'll have CEO. Some people even call that CVO, Chief Visionary Officer. You'll have a COO. You'll have CIOs or CTOs. You'll have a head of HR. You'll have all of these different kind of roles. Whether they embody these natural styles or not, maybe is a factor of whether that company is a harmonious company or not, and whether they're successful. But those roles exist. I'm going to do the opposite of your business right now. You talk about scaling up and scale architects. If we scale that down to a small team, those job titles don't exist, but the need still exists. So one of the things I'm taking from today's interview is to look around even my team, which is a team of 6. Who is our visionary? Who is our operator? Who is our processor? How are we collectively being synergistic? So even if you don't have the job titles, you still need to look around even the smallest team and go, are we doing this? What's your reflection on that?
Absolutely, because look at what happens if we start to lose one of those elements. A team without visionaries is going to come up with just stale ideas. They're not gonna drive the uncomfortable ideas that are what actually create progress in a team. A team without operators are going to come up with impractical ideas, right? You end up with too many chiefs or too many chefs in the kitchen. And we have all these big whiz bang ideas, but no one's able to really say what's the next step. If we have a team without processors, then what happens? We end up with impermanent solutions. Yeah. We're making it up as we go every single time, but there's no continuity or momentum that's really built up. And if we end up with a team without synergists, well, we've already talked about that. It's just anarchy, right? Like we just can't hold it together long enough. And ultimately, someone is alienated. And quite honestly, it's typically visionary or processor, because that's where most of the conflict happens.
Yeah, wonderful. And my team listen to this show, so they know now when they do listen to this, they know what we're going to be talking about on Monday morning. We're going to have a critical analysis and have a look and say, well, what are we doing here? Who's the visionary? I'll stick my hand up and go, well, that is my natural leadership style without any doubt. Who is our operator? Who is our processor? Are we being synergistic? I think even in our team of 6, we can learn a lot from this, Scott. And if we're ever going to scale, which we plan to do, by the way, our leadership academy is already growing. Our coaching business is already growing. We do intend to scale, but we will need a processor to help us to be able to do that. Otherwise, it'll just be make it up as we go along. Yeah, really powerful stuff.
And so there's actually 2 different answers to that question. I just want to throw this out there. So for the more entrepreneurial in the audience, for those younger organizations, even similar to yourself, there's a cadence to these coming in, and we introduce them in this way for a reason. The secret early on, it's very difficult to start an organization without a visionary, right? It's rare that happens. In the event that it does, we see a lot of them fail, because what visionaries bring early on is a resilience to keep going, right? Visionaries are the type who will leave a job working 40 hours for someone else to go work 80 hours for themselves, not get paid anything, and have an 8 out of 10 chance for failure. Like, that's a visionary. And it's that just kind of, drive to do, the impossible in many senses that keeps the team going. And again, what they find pretty early on is that they need to bring in operators. Now, what I want to do is pause it there for a little bit to say the recipe for success for a relatively small organization is actually to work the visionary operator relationship for as long as you can. You don't want to try and precede problems with a processor. It's like stepping on your brake pedal on a straightaway in a race. That's not what we do. You got to wait until the turn comes and then you hit the brakes. And so for those more entrepreneurial organizations, you will get a higher return off of really driving to the visionary and operator styles. And what you'll find is that you don't need the extra brake pedal from a processor that early. And you also don't really need the synergism of a synergist, because visionaries and operators tend to work pretty well, just symbiotically. But once you reach that point where that's not working anymore, it's at that stage that you have to recognize the missing piece is the processor. So getting that timing right is really important. And it's a little different for bigger organizations that have already gotten through that kind of critical mass, and smaller organizations that are still trying to build up speed.
I feel like we've turned into a coaching session for my business, Scott, and I'm getting free consultancy. So that is correct in where we are at the moment, right? So if you think about visionary and operator, we're still doing a lot of things. Well, only started a few months ago. We're still doing a lot of things that are trial and error. Where we have a go at this. Did it work? What did we learn from that? We try this. We're throwing things on the wall and seeing what sticks in many regards. So we're trying different things and we're learning something new every day. If we tried to process a not very good solution, we will scale the wrong thing, right? So we've probably still got a season where we need to keep on going to keep practicing and trialing error those different things until we go, there it is. There's the magic sauce. That's what we need to process. That's what we need to scale. Exactly it. So, and I'd say we're not
what
there
processes
yet.
do. Yeah, what processes do is they help us to sustain or scale success. We can't create initial success through processes, and that's why it's very important to not do them too early, because we'll end up, just like you're saying, either reproducing something that's not working very well, or just completely missing the thing that worked well because we assumed right out of the gate that we knew more than we actually did. And so there's nothing against processors. I am a processor, actually, right? And I've got a lot of visionary in me as well, which I had to leverage as an entrepreneur. But like processors they are just wonderful in the right time. And so one of the things you want to do is make sure that, yes, you bring those processors in, make sure you bring that process methodology in, but wait, to quote Penguins of Madagascar, wait until you see the whites of his eyes. It's just, And it's important because when it's kind of survival mode, or when it's that just kind of rapid learning, visionaries and operators do that much better than processors do. When it's extracting every iota of value from that learning and scaling it and building this large enterprise, that's where processors really take center stage. And so getting that cadence right, getting the timing right is every bit as important as recognizing the styles in the first place.
I want to share another story with you now as well, Scott. And Bonnie Crawford often listens to the show, so it'll be interesting to see if she listens to this episode. I started a business inside Cubic Transportation Systems called UMO Mobility, and that fundamentally played to my strength, setting the vision, painted that horizon, talk about exactly where we go. So our vision was create a world where people can move freely around their cities without traffic, without delays, and ultimately without stress. To give people freedom of choice to be able to choose their preferred mode or modes of mobility to get them from where they are to where they want to be, and the freedom to pay for those services with their preferred payment means. And underpinned by a whole heap of values, that it had to be inclusive for people from all walks of life, that we don't leave anyone behind, that we treat all people that have got a mobility need equally and create an equitable world in doing so. And so that was my job. I was painting all of that vision, had a business plan and a strategy and all of those things. And I started that business, and the first 2 years was amazing. Absolute. We knocked it out of the park. It happened much faster than I ever thought. But then it got to the point where now we need an operator. We need someone to go out there and make something of this. And that's where Bonnie took over from me in that business. And we had that wonderful transition. And when I look back now, she's grown it to twice the size that I had by getting out there. And I'm going to say this word with pure admiration. It's not a negative word. Opportunistically getting out there. I don't want to say cowboy because she's not reckless. So it's not, but risk taking and getting out there opportunistically and growing the business to twice what it was. Eventually, that's probably going to need then a processor to come back in then and go, okay, we've got to stop taking pot shots now. We've got to scale in a repeatable way. So everything that you've spoken about today is a lived experience for me of something that really worked. Started with a visionary, handed over to an operator. Eventually there's going to be a processor that comes in and takes it to a whole new level, even beyond what Bonnie gets it to. And Bonnie is amazing, by the way, a wonderful, inspirational woman leader who's doing amazing things with that business.
That's awesome. The real challenge with this, and you kind of alluded to it in here, is one of the things that we'll do if we're not careful is treat them as independent, right? So this is the visionary's time, the operator's time, and the processor's time. And if we're not careful with that, the visionary leaves when the operator starts to take over. And then the operators start to disappear when the processors take over. And what we see happen is that where organizations are rising up the life cycle, when they're adding more of these styles and getting them to work together, they will conversely fall down the other side of the life cycle if we start losing some of those styles. So the real trick is when we bring in operators to make them co-equal in their voice, right? There are different positions, but co-equal in their voice from a decision-making standpoint with visionaries. When not instead of, but in addition to. And the same thing with processors. We want to bring them up to where they're co-equal. It's not instead of, but in addition to visionaries and operators. And same thing with that synergist style in the upper stages of the cycle. And when we get all four of those working together co-equally, standing in the tension between those styles, right? Some of the just discomfort that comes with that, trying to get the diversity of thought drilled all the way down to unity of action or plan or vision, right? It's in bringing them all together that we really achieve lasting success.
Lasting. That was a really key word there. That's when you get to sustainable. You don't just rest then, because the visionary is still looking at what's on the next horizon, right? And the operator is still progressing at their pace, and the processor is building the scale behind them. So, and that's when the magic of co-creation happens. That's a very important message to leave us on, Scott, is that yes, there's different stages of different teams, but you need elements of all of it for sustainable success. Yeah, really good. I've absolutely adored this conversation, Scott. This has just been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us. Congratulations on your success, your early success with your earlier business you built up and sold, and now your success in helping more than 20,000 organizations to also go through this scaling process and the need for these 4 different styles: the visionary, the operator, the processor, the synergist. You're really doing amazing things for a lot of companies. So congratulations on your success, and thank you on behalf of the organizations that you are helping. I'd like to take us now to our rapid fire round to close us out. And these are the same questions that we ask all of our guests, Scott. So the first question, and it's very interesting for you because you started your career as an entrepreneur at exactly this age. What's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I mean, it's like, how do you pick one? But I wish I knew that there were stages to all of this. I thought of everything as being flat, and so it's always right or always wrong, and it isn't. There are stages to all of this, and getting the order right, getting that sequence right, would have saved me a lot of grief.
Yeah. Okay. Very good one. All right. Like that. What's your favorite book?
I got to be biased for a moment, but my favorite book, I'm a big business book fan. I'm terrible at reading fiction. But in that world, Predictable Success is the book that actually talks about a lot of the stuff that we've covered, particularly from the organization side. And it just completely changed my life. So much so that a big part of why I sold the organization, sorry, a bird just flew into my window. Squirrel factor, right? Sorry, coming back. It had such a profound impact on my personal life and my business that I ended up selling my business and going and working with helping other people get hold of the concepts in that book. It was part of that. So it's a little coy to say because it's so central to what I do, but the reason that it's central to what I do is because it had that big of an impact on my life, and I want to see it do even more for others.
No, there's no shame in that. It's clearly been impactful for you. It's pivoted what you do and what your purpose and meaning is. So no shame in that whatsoever. What's your favorite quote?
It floats around. I think one of the ones that I like is a Thomas Jefferson quote, and he says, "Question with boldness even the very existence of God, for surely he must loved honest questioning over blind faith." And so it's important to me because I think, in whatever sector, whatever religion, whatever that means to you, there are things that we assume to be true. There are golden cows, right? That we just make true, but they're only true because we made them that way. And I love asking great questions. I love teaching folks to ask great questions. And I think that quote gives us freedom to do that.
I feel like we could have a complete podcast interview on just that quote. That's amazing, Scott. And the things that were popping into my head were about abundant curiosity, absolutely, but also about being ready to let go, to unlearn things that you think you already know, to stop listening to just what you already know so that you can discover new things and new truths and new realities. Yeah, whoa, powerful. I'm going to look that one up. I had not heard that quote before, but it resonated with me instantly. And finally, Scott, I'm sure people are going to be out there. They might be entrepreneurs. They might be in larger businesses and they do want to scale. They've reached these plateaus that we talk about where what got them to here will not get them to where they want to go. How do people get in contact with you to take avail of your services to help them break through those plateaus and scale and grow?
Yeah, the best first step, and I'm so excited to be able to say this, is that we've taken that book, the one that changed my life, Predictable Success, and we're actually giving it away for free. I bought a bunch of copies of it, and we're shipping it out to people all over the place. But if you go to book.scalearchitects.com, you can get a copy of it there for free. And it comes with all kinds of content that goes with it. Some content on the leadership styles we talked about, a couple of free reports, and just a whole host of things for leaders of every style to learn how they can lead better right where they're at.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and we'll put the link to that in the show notes so that everyone can find it. But thank you so much. That's a wonderful thing that you're doing there, helping people with that free book and helping people to discover where they need to go. So once again, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. I've learned so much. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors, helping people to scale their businesses.
Awesome. Mick, thanks for having me. I love what you do. It's been an honor.
Today's episode was brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've learned together here on the Leadership Project podcast, together with lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed towards first-time leaders, but really there's something in there for everyone. If you would like to show your appreciation for this show, we would greatly appreciate if you were able to go and get your copy of the book on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.